The time of year is upon us to tackle everyone's favorite subject, our taxes. Shawn Stack of Bromwich+Smith, licensed insolvency trustee, joins us today to talk more about taxes and the impact they can have on those who may already be struggling with their debts. It's always great to see you, Shawn.
Oh, it's always great to be with you, my friend.
Well, Shawn, Bromwich+Smith is an insolvency trustee, which we know from our previous conversations means that you help people settle debts with their creditors for less than what they owe. But people should know that everyone has to pay taxes and that debt cannot be forgiven. Is that right?
Well, sort of yes and no. I mean, we do assist people in restructuring their debt, Lindsay, but a lot of people don't understand that when you owe Canada Revenue Agency, that debt is actually able to be restructured with the help of Bromwich+Smith.
Okay, interesting. So does that mean that you really don't have to pay your taxes?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting take on it. The reality is we always have to pay our taxes, everyone, and normally it's withheld at the source. But sometimes when you end up not having enough money withheld, or if you're self-employed, you can end up being in a situation where you owe your taxes, and then because of the interest and penalties that get put on top of the debt that's owed, people just can't escape from the burden of that debt. And that's where we come in to help them restructure that.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit about interest and penalties. Isn't interest only paid on money you borrowed, and don't penalties only apply when you've missed payments?
Well, I mean, yes, in the traditional sense, if you were going to be borrowing money from like a regular credit grantor, they would loan you money, and that money that they loan you is the principal, and then the interest is the amount that they receive back for loaning that to you. Now, when it comes to Canada Revenue Agency and our taxes, what occurs is every time we generate income, we owe a little bit of that income for our taxes, and when we don't pay that, the government will actually levy it on us and say, hey, you owe this money, and then they charge an interest on that money that's not paid, and then they charge penalties as well. And then what happens is it just keeps compounding and compounding, and people can get terrible situations.
So is that how someone ends up owing money for their taxes?
Well, yeah, I mean, so you can end up in lots of different ways. So one way might be, as I was saying, your employer is not withholding enough tax off of your check. Another one might be you're in the situation, and lots of folks are, where they get a second job and they end up not having sufficient tax taken off of that job. And then when we pool everything together at the end of the year, we realize, oh, goodness, I haven't paid enough taxes. Or, of course, Lindsay, in the gig economy, we could have people that are self-employed, and they can end up not having the tax withheld there and not saving it for the end of the year. And, of course, as you know, CERB is taxable, so that's coming at people as well.
So what can happen if you simply don't file your income taxes?
Well, you know, that's an interesting question. And that's sometimes what people do is they think, well, goodness, I want to avoid this situation owing this money to Canada Revenue Agency, so I won't file them. But what's important to understand is that when you have an employer, what they'll do is when they give you your T4, there's like a sister slip that also goes to Canada Revenue Agency. So the employer tells Canada Revenue Agency what you've earned, and they also remind you what you've earned. So Canada Revenue Agency will turn to you and say, hey, Lindsay, you haven't paid your taxes on this. Here's the interest and penalty to make you pay. Now, for those people that are self-employed, kind of the same thing occurs because people are going to be writing off the payments that they've made to you as a cost in operating their business. And so Canada Revenue Agency will come against you.
So, Shawn, what then is your advice to people who haven't set the funds aside to pay their taxes or who have been avoiding them altogether?
Well, Lindsay, my first piece of advice is don't despair. Lots of people end up in this situation. But the very first thing you want to do is get those taxes filed so at least you know where you're sitting. Oftentimes what we want to do is we want to turn away from what the problem is. But what we really need to do is we need to turn towards it, and we need to reach out and make sure that we know where we're at, because Canada Revenue Agency will know where we're at as well. So you want to make an arrangements with them, see if you can make monthly payments with them. And also bear in mind that just because you're paying last year's taxes, you're still going to have taxes that are due this year. So make sure you're there. So make a budget, be realistic, and don't be afraid to reach out to help for Bromwich+Smith if you're having difficulty.
That's a good point. And as you've mentioned, it's a bit of a complicated year for some, maybe those who had to tap into CERB. So it will be an interesting tax season overall.
It certainly will. A little more interesting than the other years, but rest assured, where there's a will, there's a way. And if there's any questions that people have, feel free to reach out to Bromwich+Smith.
Well, we always feel better when we talk to you. Shawn Stack of Bromwich+Smith, thank you so much for this today.